Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 17th season of Citywide. All year we're talking about the big issues that impact the lives of New Yorkers. My guest on this edition of Citywide is Roland Lewis. He's the president and CEO of the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Ken.
Roland, we have spent the last 20 years celebrating and reinvesting in the waterfront. And I want to talk to you in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy about whether we should be fearing the waterfront instead. But give our viewers a little sense of what the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance is.
Well, Ken, we're an alliance of over 700 different businesses and organizations, civic groups, little groups like the Sebago Canoe Club, where I'm a member out in Canarsie, Brooklyn, to the New York Shipping Association, the big shippers that bring all the goods that we wear and use in the metropolitan area. Everybody that cares about, uses, and thinks about the waterfront is part of our alliance, all dedicated to using it and enjoying it and making it a healthy, great place for everybody. So the renaissance you talk about is exactly what we're about. The city a year ago passed and adopted the comprehensive waterfront plan. I was in Abu Dhabi earlier this year talking about it to city officials from around the world. It's been awarded in planning conferences in Los Angeles. I'm going to Tacoma later. It's a world-known revitalization plan for a waterfront, which we've been building over the years, as you said, over a generation, and it's coming to fruition now. And it includes the recognition of sea level rise and the threat of storm surge, which has come to everybody's mind right now. So we're an organization that wants to use this waterfront for transportation, for jobs, for education, for restoration, for great parks, for all sorts of wonderful cities.
Aren't there inherent conflicts, though, between the kayaker and the tugboat operator, between the developer who wants to build as close to the water's edge as they can, and the parks advocates that would like to have as much open space as they can? How can you all be under one umbrella?
Well, in the words of the great late Rodney King, we can all get along, and there are conflicts for sure. There are places where kayaking shouldn't happen, where there's intense commercial activity, but there's 95% of the waterfront. It's a huge waterfront, Ken. It's 520 miles of linear,
just in the city of New York.
Just in the city of New York. If you count Jersey too, the other half of the harbor, it's well over 700 miles of linear waterfront. And there's room for everything there. So, of course, there's some conflicts between what goes, a restoration of a wetland versus a shipping facility, and those can be worked out. But we should think about the 95% of that stuff where there's no disagreement, where we know it should be cleaner, we know it should be more accessible, we know there should be great parks, and it should be used by the greater population of New York and New Jersey.
Okay, so Sandy comes along. It's a hurricane plus a nor'easter plus tidal flooding. We seem to be in an era where 100-year storms come every 2 years, but this one seems to have been different from others. From your point of view, what happened? What did you hear from your constituents? What did you see in the aftermath of Sandy?
Well, before Sandy was ever, before anyone heard of Sandy, we were talking about Sandy 5 years ago. A brilliant professor named Klaus Jacob up at Columbia came to us and said, if you don't include the threat of sea level rise and storm surge in the plans you're making for the city and for the harbor, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So we paid attention to smart people who were telling us early on that this was a real threat. We had a conference in New Jersey about it with the Dutch, who have done great work to try and defend their country and their cities from the sea. So it was something we were thinking about early on. So it was not a surprise. What we heard when it happened was the flooding happened as Professor Jacob predicted. It hit the transportation systems, knocked them down. It hit the electrical systems and knocked them down. It just devastated communities that we work with tremendously but I think some of the that's the bad news that everyone's heard about, seen on the news, the devastation, which we don't belittle, and it's horrible, and there's still huge swaths of our region in terrible pain and terrible need. But there was some good news that happened. There were parks that were well designed, like the Brooklyn Bridge Park in downtown Brooklyn, right by the water, which was designed for storm surge and survived the storm surge. There was the maritime industry and the ferries who were able to get back on their feet quickly and to provide vital transportation when everything else was down and get goods going around. I should make a note to your viewers that the gas lines that we all suffered through after the storm were not the fault of the port. That gas that was getting there, it was electrical systems and trucking that couldn't get around. So our blue highways worked pretty well during it was a variety of things. Of course, the majority of our alliance partners are on the waterfront, and some suffered terrible damage, some suffered modest damage.
You yourself, your office is down in the Seaport area in the old Siemens Institute building. What was it like being in the financial district for you?
It was almost surreal. To walk down Water Street in the weeks and almost months after Sandy and see these dark hulks of buildings that used to be vibrant and alive with people was spooky. It's the physical devastation in our area isn't extreme like you see out in the Rockaways or in Staten Island, but the financial devastation has been acute. The Seaport area where I work, there's about 3 or 4 of those bars and restaurants that have managed to reopen. Many are not coming back at all. They're still dark storefronts. It is a terrible, terrible thing, and we have to get the rebuilding going faster in lots of places, including my home business district.
So is the waterfront an asset or a liability?
We are a coastal city. It is an asset. As Mayor Bloomberg said, we are not retreating from the sea. New York is where it is. We will continue to use and enjoy the waterfront as it goes forward. It's a danger, though. We have to also recognize that storms will happen in the era of climate change and sea level rise. We need to fortify our shorefront. We need to make it more forgiving of water coming in and out. The world is changing, and will change some more. We need to adapt. That's the trick. But New York is not going away.
If you were a young person trying to decide between renting an apartment in the financial district and renting that apartment in downtown Brooklyn, if you were a business trying to make the same decision about where to put your offices, would you be concerned about not the city's ultimate ability to tackle these problems, but what actually is going to happen in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I think embedded in your question is the answer. It is the city's ultimate ability. I would look toward, I would look toward the election coming up this year. Which future mayor? I have full confidence that Mayor Bloomberg is going to come up with the commission he's put together. He's going to come up with a solid plan to rebuild and restore and protect services. I want to know that the next mayor and the governor and also the federal government are going to follow through. But yeah, I would. The financial district is Wall Street's there. It's got to be protected. It's of international importance. Brooklyn in the same way, one of the most vital sections of any city and around the world. It's not going anywhere. We must protect it. We must find ways to make sure that our subways are fortified, and there's lots of things we can be doing that will make that happen. So if I was that young person, I would move in.
The storm, I think, put into kind of stark contrast the vulnerability of many of the residents on the edge of the city, particularly those in public housing. Mm-hmm. And is your thought for those residents and for the housing authority and for the bankers that may have to finance the reconstruction, is it the same? In other words, are there parts of the city that we should retreat from, where we should not rebuild, I don't know where we would put the people if we made that decision, but is it the right, after September 11th, a lot of people said we're going to rebuild the towers, they should be bigger than they were before. The symbolism there, I think, was important. But the notion that the financial district had to be rebuilt, I think, was pretty clear to most people. Should we be retreating from parts of the shoreline?
Well, I think that our mayor has drawn a clear line in the sand saying no. I think in time, the dynamics of the cost and the insurance issues will dictate that certain areas need to be retreated from. I'm not sure which ones right now. I think it's a little premature to talk about that. There's people in terrible pain that need to be rehoused. That there's still communities that are without power, or, and people that are living away from their home for months now. So it's not the moment, I think. But I think in the next couple of years, as we rebuild, there may be opportunities through FEMA money and others to consolidate certain areas to make perhaps some expand parkland where it doesn't make sense to put in the infrastructure to do that. But I do think you also bring up a very good point. I think there's a large disproportionate number of lower income folks that are living at water's edge. We used to put everything we didn't want at the water's edge, including housing projects and poor people. So we have an obligation to make sure those folks' homes, we can't relocate those tens of thousands of people. We have to make sure those homes, first of all, are rehabilitated in a quick and good fashion, and they have good power and the services they need. And then second, make sure that their services are fortified and they can go back to those large housing complexes. I just came from a rally down at City Hall where a lot of those folks are demanding those services, and I agree with them 100%.
We're going to continue talking about the waterfront when Citywide continues right after this.
Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, activists, government leaders. We speak with each one to one. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.
Welcome back to Citywide. We're speaking with Roland Lewis of the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance. So the first half of the show, we talked about sort of where we are, and now the question is, where do we go from here? So the Alliance has a 12-point plan. It's one page. It's more a set of principles, I think, than it is a specific blueprint for the future. The governor's got commissions. The mayor's got commissions. The city council is organizing a series of hearings. This will be the storm that launched 1,000 conferences. Is there a consensus agenda? Is it too soon at this point? Are we talking about social policy first and engineering later, or is it the engineering that drives the social policy? So what's the path forward?
Well, you're correct. If any casual observer might be just confused and wondering who's in charge. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do right now is call for better coordination. We talked with the state and the city commissions yesterday, our alliance, and I'm going to be talking to, there's a federal one too, led by Housing Secretary Sean Donovan. We'll be talking with them too. And one of the good things our alliance can do is actually make these connections. As someone who used to work in government probably knows better than I do, sometimes government doesn't communicate well with each other at different levels. So there's a lot of voices and a lot of concern about what to do, and I think it's a good thing. People are excited and interested. We spent 5 years trying to get people interested in thinking about the waterfront. Now everybody's thinking about it, and half of them are afraid of it. So there's a moment, of recovery that we're in, and action. Your question about engineering versus policy, and it's not engineering versus policy, it's engineering and policy. One of the things we're doing to try and give value added is bring together some of those top firms that around the world that most are located here in New York City, to talk about the best design principles that can happen. We want to create something along the lines of LEED for waterfront design.
That's the sustainability standard.
Sustainability, exactly. So you have LEED buildings, LEED appliances. So basically, people can be awarded and incentivized for doing the right things as they're trying to create new waterfronts and
But Roland, we as a city government we're going to have some tough choices to make. I have said to my friends in the engineering community that they are generals, that the president tells them what war to go fight and they go out and fight it. If you said to the engineering community that you wanted to put a dome over New York so that it would never rain here again, they would prepare the specifications for that. There would be 4 alternative design solutions, and they could tell you how much it was going to cost at the end of the day. But the choice of whether to harden positions, to retreat from the waterfront, the funding, all of that's pretty complicated. And it's happening at a time when the federal government in some ways is in retreat from its responsibilities. The state government has its own set of challenges, and the city government is about to transition out when the mayor leaves at the end of the year. So are we just in for, let me put it a different way. It took them 10 years to kind of figure out what to do with the area in Lower Manhattan that was impacted by September 11th. How in God's name are we going to figure out something that affects 700 miles of waterfront?
It won't be easy, Ken, but it's got to be done, and it's got to be done right, because the future of the viability of the world's greatest city depends upon it. And I think, you know, anything as simple as boardwalk, what's the best boardwalk design? We need to have that kind, what's the best bulkhead design? Yeah, and yes, there are important policy questions about where we build, where we fortify. But I was talking to the gentleman who's the head of Arcadis, a firm you may have heard of, but they're a huge Dutch firm. They built they fortified New Orleans, they protected London, they've done lots of work in the Netherlands. And Pete Dirk, the head of that organization, said, Roland, you build the gates, it's the last thing you do. There are so many things should be policies you must undertake to beforehand of green infrastructure, of hardening vital systems. There are lots of things we can be doing. So having that palette out there for our leaders to choose from that's intelligent and correct and cutting edge. You're right, the engineers will do what they're told to do, but they've been told to do lots of things in different places around the world. Right. And we must learn from them quickly and make a plan for the Rockaways, make a plan for Staten Island, for Lower Manhattan. Each of these are small cities that need to.
And some of these, look, there are some things that are simple and don't cost that much money. Whether you put the boiler room on the top of the building or the bottom of the building,
correct,
as long as you can design it safely. There are some things that seem simple but are extraordinarily expensive, like putting all the power lines on Long Island underground would be expensive. And I guess we will have to strike that balance. Have you seen anything from the candidates for mayor that you think is important? I mean, clearly they all are concerned at the delay in restoration of services along the water's edge. They all say we're not going to retreat from the water's edge. They all say we need to invest more in infrastructure. The mayor has been doing this for a long time. He's leaving. Right. How comfortable are you with the sort of leadership, not just the candidates for mayor, but our legislators, our members of Congress, our city council members? Do we have the political will and the resources to do this the right way?
Well, that's a
big question. Yeah.
Let me peel that onion a little bit. You got on the mayoral for the mayoral race. We're almost in the silly season of our election campaign, but it's not silly at all this year. The question you're asking is the one question that I think should be the litmus test of any future mayor. How serious, how committed, and how smart are you about rebuilding the city and building it smart going forward post-Sandy? We're a civic organization that will be demanding that answer from every single one that throws their hat in the ring. Chris Quinn came out quickly with, I think, a very interesting and progressive plan of, you know, it was controversial, calling about the gates and burying of lines and financing, begged some financing questions, but at least she's out there talking about it. I think everybody else that's going to be running for mayor will be challenged to do the same thing. You talked about the federal level, which I think is critical, because that's where the money is going to come from, frankly. We suffered a national calamity here in New York, and just as they did with Katrina in New Orleans in the Gulf area, and it demands a national response. The bill that went through the Senate prior to the end of the last 112th session of the Congress was a good bill. It had a lot of very good stuff in it for the New York area. $2 billion for mitigation. That would be progressive stuff to try and mitigate against future flooding. A large amount, $3 billion, I think, for capital improvements, and a large CDBG funds. So a lot of good stuff in there. The $64,000 or the $60 billion question is whether our Republican colleague in the metropolitan area will get the House to move forward. I think it was infamous, and it was a very interesting moment when Representative King and Grimm and others got to the floor of the House to
denounce their own leadership,
cry foul, in the most strong terms one could imagine, and they were right. So I hope the House, in the timetable that Speaker Boehner put forward, gets the bill on the floor, gets it passed, and the Senate does the same, and hopefully with the same parameters, and gets that money flowing in for the folks in need, and equally important for the rebuilding going forward for the next generation.
Is this a teaching moment also? Most New Yorkers don't know what happens when they flush a toilet, let alone what happens to that waste when the tides have risen. They don't necessarily understand the infrastructure of the city, or let alone the chemistry of what happens when oil and water start to mix in a disaster. Is there an opportunity here to educate the next generation to use this as a way of renewing interest in science and technology and engineering and in math?
And in infrastructure.
And in infrastructure.
Ken, you couldn't be more right. I think the giant teaching moment that we all recognize, oh my gosh, we're a coastal city. We know there's this giant thing called the ocean right next to us that we need to live with, not fight. So I think the next generation has taken that, and they're hopefully smarter and better at figuring stuff out than we were. But yeah, everything from the combined sewer overflow issue you've talked about where the waste goes and how it pollutes our waterways when it rains too much. It's all part of
logistics. People would never have imagined that they couldn't really get gas because the electricity went out in a depot.
In Jersey, exactly right.
But I also think for young people, it's sort of one more mess that we're leaving them to clean up.
Well, it's a challenge, and I hope our organization, the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, will be able to help guide that discussion as a strong civic group.
So if people want to get involved, if they want to be part of that conversation, is there an opportunity for them to do that, or is this just something where the experts are all going to figure it out?
No, we are a grassroots organization. We're over 700 groups of every stripe, and we want 700 more, because this waterfront is important to all of us. They can come visit us at waterfrontalliance.org. There's lots of ways to get involved. And most of all, get involved with that local council race, the borough president race, the mayoral race. Ask these folks what they're going to do about the recovery from Sandy and to protect us from future storms.
My thanks to Roland Lewis, President and CEO of the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of Citywide. Send your comments and suggestions to Citywide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at cuny.tv.